We all have these scripts for our lives, a story we want to play out a certain way, and then being disappointed when things don't work out exactly as we had hoped or planned. This week, we have a film guru and screenwriter, Chad DeMiguel, here to talk about the power and pattern of stories in our lives, and why knowing all these elements will make you live out your life story differently. Let's dive in. Chad, it is so good to have you on the No Gray Areas podcast, mainly because we've known each other for I think it's going on over 15 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's been a while.
Which means we were both young when we met.
Yeah. A few rings around the tree.
Yes, there are a few more rings around the tree. But first of all, for the audience, oh my goodness, I'm so excited about this podcast because I can guarantee you, I can promise you as an audience, you'll never watch movies the same again once you understand this, because we're going to talk about story structure. And for some of them, they may go, that sounds boring. Not at all. It's fascinating. But let's back up a little bit, give them a little context. So you and I met over 15 years ago. We were in Africa, right?
Yeah, that's right. We were there for a couple different reasons, but ended up we were working on a project and ended up being roommates. And at the time,
that was an accident.
That was an accident. It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was kind of serendipitously.
We were both supposed to have our own rooms, and
Yeah.
They made a mistake. And so I'm watching footage that you shot that day every night because I had taught an editing class in high school, so I was an expert, of course. That's a joke. That's sarcasm. But then we ended up having some good deep conversations too.
Yeah, it was really neat. I'd come in and share footage of what I had been capturing that day, being in it was in Uganda, and and I would say, Pat, what do you think of this shot? Do you think this is working? And that just developed a friendship that we've had to this day.
And I would try to drop like I knew it. I'd be like, I think we need a good reflection shot, right? So
you made the work better. Yeah.
Yes, whatever. But I remember there had been a film that had come out, a documentary that had come out that you and I had both watched that really impacted us deeply. Yeah. And we started saying, man, what if we ever could do a story like that together? Like just, it was just things we were saying.
Yeah.
And a couple years later, I'm in a meeting with the vice mayor of Phoenix, and we hear about this issue of child sex trafficking.
Yeah.
And again, everyone knows that happens in the U.S. now, but at that time, when you would talk about child sex trafficking, it would be, well, that's in India or Thailand but it was like, no, it's here. So I called you up and I said, Chad, that story that we talked about, I think we have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that launched us on a journey or a quest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Use those words on purpose.
Very intentional.
Yes.
Yeah. That was an amazing season working together and collaborating to create a feature documentary that had advocacy and awareness about the plight of sex trafficking of minors in the Phoenix area. And it was an incredible time. We worked with government officials, nonprofit, ministry leaders, really an idea that you had led and spearheaded around what would it look like if the city came together in a way to be a voice against this kind of evil that was taking place, and became an advocacy tool that we used to help raise that awareness and amplify those children that had been and continue, unfortunately, to be impacted by sex trafficking.
Yeah. And we had, like so many things throughout history, we had no idea the impact it would have. We thought, well, maybe this can raise awareness locally, but we ended up screening that in New York, in Chicago, in Seattle, in LA, really all over the country. And it was one of the first documentaries. There were numerous that came out around that time, but it was one of the first documentaries that were raising awareness on that, and was part of this collaboration that was amazing to see. And the church actually being part of that. There were 72 churches in Greater Phoenix that were part of spearheading that.
It was remarkable to see the power that happens when people of faith come together, when the city comes together, and to really harness and leverage and see the impact that a person's story has, and how when that's told, it has the impact to make a great change, to really change the world.
Mm-hmm. There were some after effects to that for you, wasn't there? I don't know for sure. I don't know that we've ever talked about this. There certainly was for me.
I have a good friend that's he has a background in photojournalism, and I remember that he picked me up at the airport and he said, "It really looks like that you've been wearing this experience in a way, because you do when
He could see that on you.
yeah, he could sense that. I think when you live in the world of telling these kinds of stories, that certainly is its own kind of burden in a way, and I think that he could tell that had been, having an impact. And I think for all of us, when you experience that kind of evil, that's just unfathomable, it definitely has an impact. Certainly we're in no way like those that work every day in and out of that, but I think it made a mark on all of us that worked on that for a time.
You can't wade into the muck and mire of this world and the deep injustices of this world and not have it deeply affect you. There's no doubt. Like, I didn't realize it at the time, but in hindsight, I look back and go, I would never be the same.
Yeah.
Like that, there was that was one of those markings in my life journey. If we compared it to like a chapter book of our life, that was one where you dog ear that chapter and be like, that was, that changed the trajectory in some ways.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, because, as we get into talking further about this idea of story and story principles and understanding our own lives through that lens, you often find in a story where, as a character makes or begins their quest or their journey, they realize that they'll never be the same again. That there's a transformation that can happen, but there's also many deaths that take place along the way as well. Many deaths. Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into this then, Chad. This is why I am so excited about this. I'm going to love this interview because I really am not going to have to work at it. You just did a perfect transition, which just
a good segue. Yeah,
it was perfect how you transitioned to that. So this is going to be the easiest interview ever. But let's transition. Tell us really quick, like an overview of story structure. And again, audience,
spoiler
I promise you, you'll never watch movies the same again once you understand this. I didn't. We were just talking before we came in here that you loaned me a book about 15 years ago by Robert McKee called Story. Talks about story structure, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, the inciting incident, all these things you can talk about. I still have that. I'll get it back to you someday, okay? So give us an overview. Pretend just imagine that most of our audience has no idea what story structure is.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it can have an impact in terms of, am I going to be able to enjoy movies the same way again? So hopefully this is not a spoiler alert, but enhances that. I'll back up a little bit. When I first started out my career, I was teaching screenwriting and filmmaking at the college level, and kind of looking at these storytelling principles that are used in Hollywood, storytelling principles that you'll see really used in like TV shows and whatnot, storytelling principles that are based on timeless ways of connecting with an audience. And it was interesting, as I was sharing these, I thought this is a helpful way to also look at our lives. And I think, when we hear about God saying that he's the author and perfecter of our faith, there's these kind of eternal rules that are written into a story, if you will, that seem to transcend time and space. And so every story tends to have with it, or at least those stories that we know and we love when we go and see a movie, effectively a 3-act structure, or some kind of a structure where you could call it, it's setup, where you're introduced to an ordinary world and you meet a character or a series of characters, and their ordinary world is their status quo. So it's the way that life has been for some time. So if you look at like the movie Rocky was as he called himself, a 2-bit boxer in Philadelphia and just trying to make ends meet. You think about a movie like Finding Nemo, we're introduced to this dad who's a clownfish, and he's kind of neurotic, overly protective, and that's his status quo.
And they do that, like in a movie, they do that sometimes in a few minutes, right?
Just a few, usually it's about 10 to 25 minutes, and you get a sense of, this is the way that this character's world has been for some time, and then something happens. And it's an event which is often referred to as the inciting incident. It's a catalyst that disrupts that character's status quo. It does it to such a degree that they can no longer go back to the way things were. So Rocky is offered the chance to fight Apollo Creed, kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Marlin in Finding Nemo, most of his children are killed by this barracuda except for Nemo. So the world is radically disrupted. As a result of that, the character is offered to go onto a quest to pursue a goal that helps to, in fact, reconcile that disruption. So for Marlin in Finding Nemo, it's Finding Nemo. His son is taken by the scuba diver after this inciting incident, and it's his journey.
Completely disrupted his life on that little piece of coral with his neurotic self. Son.
Changed everything.
Changed everything.
Yeah, his life could no longer go back to the way it was. And Rocky, it's him wrestling with, do I have what it takes to go the distance with Apollo Creed? It's Luke Skywalker being asked to become a Jedi with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so with the best movie ever made, Braveheart. Yeah. Freedom.
I used to joke when I would preach at churches, I would several times a year weave in some Braveheart thing there.
Not in a kilt though.
Yeah. No, I would not preach in a kilt, but I would somehow weave
that
it
would
in.
Leave a mark. Yeah.
But in that movie, what you're describing is you kind of learn this world that they're in.
Yeah.
It's the ordinary world.
Yeah.
And his wife is killed.
Yeah.
And that's like this inciting incident, and it launches him on a quest and a journey. His life would never be the same, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He would be marked by that, and
every good story structure has that.
Every good story structure has that. And so the character, they're in the pursuit of this goal, and as they're pursuing this, things get harder and harder, and the conflict escalates to where this is resolved at the end of Act 2 and Act 3 in a kind of resolution.
So as we unpack this story structure, I want our audience to just really watch for these two things. And you're going to unpack 4 parts of story structure. You already mentioned one of them, but you're going to unpack that a little bit more. Yeah. But I want them to notice 2 main things. One of them, it's going to change the way they watch movies.
Yeah.
Okay. So the inciting incidents, for example, once I understood that, my kids would roll their eyes when we watch a movie at home because we'd get into it and all of a sudden I'd pause it and be like, there's the inciting incident. Or we'd be in movie theaters and I'd lean over to my wife and go, that's the inciting incident. So I don't know if it's as I wanted to sound like a know-it-all, but it is fascinating.
Yeah.
I really think our audience who's listening right now are going to start paying attention to that and go, oh, that event right there that just happened, that changes everything for the character.
It does.
Yeah.
And we often ask ourselves, like, why would this be the case? Why are these the tools, if you will, that Hollywood will deploy? And when we see the movies and the shows that we love, there's this consistency or a pattern. And I think there's a couple of eternal clues that we can look at that speak to our own life story. So George Lucas, when he was writing the first Star Wars, based it off of this book called A Hero with 1,000 Faces. And A Hero with 1,000 Faces is written by Joseph Campbell, a mythologist who effectively said, there's, when we look at through time and space, there are all of these different myths. And it's effectively a hero that has a 1,000 different faces. But each of these stories really share the same features, all of these different myths. What really kind of helped me to get there and understand this is when C.S. Lewis was coming to faith, he was good friends with Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, and they both loved stories and creating story-based worlds.
They were both masters at writing them, weren't they?
Yeah, masters of storytelling. And Tolkien, a man of faith, was engaging with Lewis early on in his academic career, and he said to Lewis, he said, what is it that you love most in this life? And Lewis said, well, it's the stories that I inhabit and the stories that I love to tell and write. It's these myths that we spend so much time in. And Tolkien said, well, what if there was one myth and this myth was true and all the great myths and stories pointed to that? And that really became a kind of inciting incident or catalyst for Lewis to become a man of faith and to discover Jesus. And so when we look at the great story that our lives point to, it's the story of God who is come into the world, a world in Act 1, which you could say is Genesis 1, the ordinary world, the way that the world should be. And there was a great disruption, and that disruption happened in Genesis 3, the fall, and everything was turned upside down.
Every day we watch the news or hear the news on social media or whatever, we're hearing about that upheaval of that story, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah. Things are not the way that they're supposed to be. And so enter in the hero, the ultimate hero, Jesus. We can make the mistake of thinking we're the hero of our lives, or that these various characters in the Bible are the hero, but it's really it's Jesus that's the hero who's in pursuit of a goal to rescue and reconcile and redeem the whole world. And that is most of Scripture is Act 2, where we see the resolution of that, where he redeems and makes all things new. And so we're drawn to these stories, I think, because as Tolkien said, they speak to the greater truth. And as characters, we are caught up into this great myth that's true, this great story. And our lives echo that. So stories often, I think, are a clue to what's eternally written in our hearts.
There's actually a verse that talks about eternity is written in our hearts.
Yeah.
So Tolkien was basically saying every story that you look at throughout humanity really has a lot of the same structure. So we're talking about movies right now.
Yeah.
But go back 700 years, they're sitting around a fire, right? And someone's telling a story. And that story would be similar structure where there's someone who's in a struggle to overcome, to learn, to find courage or whatever it is. Yeah. But Tolkien's point was all those stories point to one story. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
And that's what caught C.S. Lewis's attention.
Yeah, that all these stories are echoes of the great story where you have, and this is true. If you read Hero with a Thousand Faces, there's a character that experiences a death, that goes to the land of the dead, that is remade and is reborn. And it's what is, what story does that ultimately point to? We look at the cross and the resurrection and how there's a redemption and a renewal that happens as a result of that. And so if it's true that God is the author of our stories, and if we're part of the great story, then how does that impact how we look at our lives through that lens? If he's authoring that, how is he authoring it? What exactly might he be up to as the author of our own stories?
Well, once again, beautiful transition, because that goes right into what I said. There's two things I want them to watch for. One of them is just going to change how they watch movies. Yeah. Pay attention to this. But if we as an audience take to heart what you're talking about today, it has the potential of really changing our lives in a sense. Transformational in a lot of ways. And we'll realize the reason that I'm connected to stories and the reason that I love stories, the reason I love a good movie or a good book is because I see myself in those stories. Yeah. Like every single person listening has had inciting incidents in their life. Yeah. They have conflict in their life. They have to learn. They don't learn courage by reading about it. They learn courage because they were in a situation that they were forced to learn courage in, right? Yeah. So there's two things as we unpack this. Yeah. It's going to change how you watch movies. And if you allow it, it should really be transformational. So let's start unpacking this. Inciting incident. Yeah. You explained a little bit what that is. Yeah. If they start paying attention in movies, they can be annoying to their friends or spouse like I was and lean over and mention. But it's always not just one inciting incident, right?
Right. So a story is built around a series of these, which you could also call reversals. So when a character is moving forward and Marlin is in the pursuit of finding Nemo and things get harder and harder, he comes upon these events that take him in directions that he did not expect, did not anticipate, and usually don't often want. So for him, it's getting caught up with like the sea turtles and meeting Dory, who annoys him, but also is
the sharks in the 12-step program.
The sharks in the 12, exactly. Fish are our friends.
Yes.
But these are all necessary to help propel the character along in their story. And it's often true in our lives where we have these kind of reversals where we think that life should play out a certain way. We probably all have life scripts for ourselves where we think that this is the way that life should unfold for me. These are the kinds of things that I expect to happen or should happen. And when that doesn't happen, we can often ask this question. It's a question that Frodo asked Gandalf in the Fellowship of the Ring, and he said, I don't understand why this is happening. I wish none of this would have happened. And this is as he's starting out in his journey and he's trapped in a mine. And Gandalf says to him, it's not up to us to choose the events that happen in our lives. What's up to us is to choose how we will respond to that. And that's so true because each of us have these moments in our life where we may be asking the question, God, why is this happening to me? Why am I experiencing this tragedy, this event, this moment of brokenness? And the author is deeply invested in that. That question is important. But the author is also asking another question. And that question is, who is this person becoming as a result of this? That each of these experiences of reversals that move a character along in their story counterintuitively, unexpectedly, serve a greater purpose. And the purpose behind that is to transform that character. I think we often think of ourselves as, I think sometimes living a kind of static reality that I'm just getting up and life is about to-do lists and achieving things. But what an author understands is that a person in a story is never static. They're in the process of becoming. And as Bobette Buster, who's a screenwriting guru and lecturer, she says, characters are often either becoming more fully alive, meaning they're becoming more human, more of themselves, the best part of who they are, or they're becoming the walking dead. Not necessarily becoming a zombie, but becoming someone who is more embittered, more cynical, less human, and less alive. And so these stories speak to that reality. Is we do, as Gandalf says, we do have a choice with how we will respond in that moment. Will we continue to follow God and trust that the author is good? Or will we abandon the quest and potentially become less fully human and less fully alive?
Oh my goodness, this is so amazing. Let me just pause and try to help the audience connect the dots here on what you're saying. So what did Frodo say? He said,
I wish none of this would have happened to me.
See, everyone in the audience has, and again, if you picture your life as a chapter book, and we don't know where we're at in that, like I might be in my last chapter, I don't know, or I may have 10 more chapters. Yeah. But if I look back on the chapters that have already come before this moment that I'm sitting with you, there's quite a few of those chapters that has me going, why is this happening? Yeah. I don't want this to happen. Yeah. You get fired, you have a miscarriage, you have, we could go on and list these inciting incidents that all of us have in our life. Yeah. And they leave us in a very raw emotional place. Yeah. But what you're suggesting is that why we connect to story as humans is because we see ourselves in those stories.
That's right.
And that's what you're also suggesting, is that if I will allow that inciting incident, that firing, that miscarriage, that we had to move, we had whatever that might be, that will launch me on a quest, on a journey, and I will either become a better person, more alive, or less of a person, more of a zombie. But I get that choice.
Yeah, you get that choice along the way. And what's I think so powerful about this is we look in Scripture and we see that, like in the story of Joseph, one terrible reversal or inciting incident happened to him, one after the other. You can imagine what he was thinking in those terrible, lonely, dark years when he was imprisoned and wrongly accused, and wondering, why? I don't understand this. Like, why is this happening to me? Years of silence that I think as any of us might, rail against the darkness, wondering, God, I don't understand. This makes no sense. And yet we get the benefit, as did he, where he was able to see, after a lot of very painful, difficult, terrible years, where God was able to do the seemingly impossible, which was to bring beauty out of ashes, light out of darkness, and redeem a seemingly impossible situation. Why? Because God was authoring his story in a way that was bigger than I think he even could have anticipated. We think about in Romans, God works all things for the good of those who love him. What's particularly powerful about looking at that from a storytelling perspective is an author cares deeply about every detail of a character's life. Nothing is there by accident. In fact, those things that plague and hurt and seemingly harm the character the most, that is where a good author will use those events, those experiences in a character's life to bring about a potential transformation, the greatest good. And that's ultimately what they're after. A character thinks, hey, this story really is about, Rocky is saying, it's really about me trying to beat Apollo Creed. But truly, that story is about a man who has to overcome his own sense of insecurity to say, do I have the ability to go the distance? Am I just a bum? Am I just that? Is that my identity? Or is my identity that I'm heroic and I'm a champion? Yeah. And that's true in our lives as well. We can think that life is solely about the pursuit of really good things, but God has a much bigger idea in mind, and that is transforming us into the kind of people that he wants us to become. And more often than not, he will use those very difficult, painful, confusing, disorienting events in our lives.
Oh, there's nothing that transforms us more than pain. Yeah. And I hate that that's true. I really
me
do.
Too.
Because if you've lived very many decades, you've gone through some really, really painful things. And this, Chad, this is one of the things that makes it so difficult with this is when you watch a movie or when you read a book or you refer to Joseph, you can read the story of Joseph in Genesis in about, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You watch a movie and it's 2 hours. But in real life, that inciting incident, you don't wake up 2 hours later or move into the next stage 2 hours later.
Yeah.
Like a movie moves us through all those stages in 2 hours. But in real life, you might be in that, what one writer called the dark night of the soul for weeks or months, sometimes years.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it, we connect with that character on the screen.
Yeah.
But in real life, we don't move through all of that in 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's weeks or months sometimes, right? And that's what makes those so difficult in our real lives.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing that makes a really wonderful movie or TV show so compelling for us is that stories have the ability to take
good point.
Emotion and seemingly random events and bring meaning out of that. I mean, if you and I have, if we have an experience today that's really hard or really great, probably what we're going to do is tell that and share that in the form of a story. We're not going to bring up our spreadsheet or, we're not going to put this on a PowerPoint. We make sense of our lives through story.
It's so we're going to move on from the inciting incident in a moment, but this so radically changed the way I read story that even the way I started reading the Bible. And back when I was preaching, I started using this whole story structure and put it up on the screen sometimes. So when I preach the book of Jonah, you read the book of Jonah and you see this the exact story structure you're talking about. You see, we're introduced to this character. We see him in his ordinary status quo. And then boom, there's this inciting incident that happens and will change his entire life. And he launches him on a quest and a journey. And then you see this repeated conflict.
Yeah.
The book of Esther, one of my favorite books in the Bible because it's such a powerful story.
Yeah.
Same thing. You open up to the story and you see this status quo, this king and queen in Persia, and just life is normal. And boom, there's this inciting incident. It changes every character in the story is different after that.
Yeah.
So I get excited by this because you see it in movies, you see it in books you read, you see it in the books in the Bible that you read, and it's in our everyday life. This is why we connect to it. So let's jump into the next one. You talk about masks, where you say every character wears a mask to protect themselves.
Yeah.
It's how they survive. The author is writing the story in such a way that he's removing or she's removing the masks.
That's right.
Right.
So a character has a way that you get a sense of when you meet them in the inciting incident. So in the movie The King's Speech, Bertie, as he was known by his close friends and family, was the second in line to the heir of to be the next king of England. He wasn't the next direct. He was the second in line, and he was someone as a result of a speech impediment that he had struggled with and was filled with a lot of shame over. Also in part because of how he was treated, really felt comfortable living in the shadows, sitting on the sidelines, living his life in the margins. And that was kind of his mask, if you will. He felt comfortable being less than I think that he really saw and knew of himself. And as we know from history, his older brother abdicates the throne, and he's now thrust into the limelight, put into a position that he did not want. His inciting incident was his brother leaving the throne, and he now has to become the public face of the monarchy. And for someone who struggled with a speech impediment, this was just nothing but an utter horror to him. And so he had this way of living life that was, this way of coping with the world and getting along in the world that kind of worked for him for a time. But the author steps in and orchestrates events that will no longer allow him to live like that. He's confronted with a choice. Am I going to step into this journey of becoming the king, having to live and become heroic and courageous and face this thing that I'm so ashamed of, that has so much weakness for me? And in doing so, will he step into that and become more fully alive, become more human, or will he continue to live in the shadows? So for him, the worst thing imaginable happening becomes the catalyst for his story. And interestingly enough, the greatest act of redemption in his life.
So every character has some kind of mask that they're wearing.
Yeah.
and these inciting incidents, this conflict, these dark nights of the soul,
Yeah.
start, if we allow it to, start removing those masks and stepping into what we might say is who we really were meant to be.
Yeah. You could call it the false self, if you will. When we think about Paul, when he talks about the old man, this inner civil war that he has with himself all the time. And he says, why do I do the thing that I hate to do? It's the old man in me. Well, from a storytelling standpoint, you could use the words the false self. So it's the way that we cope in the world that is how we pose, if you will, how we do what other people expect of us, how we behave, whether it's religious or irreligious. It's the way that we put on a kind of show for the world that's not really authentic to who we are, but it's the way that we survive and we cope. And an author knows that a character won't really thrive and live and flourish well if they continue to live from that mask. And that was Birdie's mask. It was, hey, I'm just going to live in the shadows and be this kind of guy that doesn't really disrupt the status quo. And that choice is no longer left him. Yeah. And that happens all the time in our life. Will we continue to live from the false self, what society or my parents expect of us, or will we follow God into the dangerous unknown and become more real, become more fully alive?
Isn't it interesting,
yeah,
though, that in story and in real life, which is why, again, I think we connect with story, that generally we don't peel off those masks or maybe even recognize that we're wearing one of those masks without conflict, without that dark night of the soul, without that inciting incident. So I love that you use the word survival, that these masks help us survive. Any time that I've spent very much time visiting or getting to know someone's story, I'll generally eventually get around to asking them, what do you think your internal vow is? And what I mean by that, and I don't know where I got this, I heard it from someone a while ago, but usually when we're young, we take an internal vow and we don't even realize it. It wasn't a conscious decision you made.
Yeah.
So if I'm being transparent and honest with our audience, I would say my internal vow, I didn't realize this till I was in my 40s, was I'll prove you wrong. You say I can't do that, I'll prove you wrong. And it worked for me. So that's the thing. That mask actually protects and helps us to survive. And it works for a while until it doesn't.
Yeah.
Some people's internal vow may be, they grew up in an abusive home or something, and they'll be like, I'll never let anybody hurt me like that again. And they don't realize they subconsciously took that internal vow, but it's affecting their relationships. Now they're not ever letting anybody in.
Yeah.
So I love for people, and I would ask our audience to do that, wrestle with what is your internal vow that you took?
Yeah.
Because I'll bet God is having them on a journey right now to recognize what that is. And it's probably through some hard things that you've gone through or going through to help peel that mask off, right? Is that what a mask would be?
Absolutely. That's such a powerful and compelling way of describing it. It makes me think of the movie Good Will Hunting, and Will Hunting, played by Matt Damon, was someone who went through a lot of trauma and pain in his childhood. He grew up in the foster system, experienced a lot of physical and emotional abuse. So, rightfully so, here's a guy that's orphaned who is just trying his best to make his way in the world, but he came to a place before we meet him in that journey, which is, I'm never going to let anybody get really close to me and really see me, because if they do, they're going to abandon me. They're going to reject me. And that story is about the unmasking of Will, because his mask is he's really intelligent, off the charts brilliance, and he's able to keep people at an arm's length. And so his story is, there are these characters, these relationships that come into his life that confront him with that. Skylar, the woman that he's dating, and Sean, his therapist, played by I'm forgetting his name, Robin Williams, that just does such a masterful job.
Yeah.
And they lovingly confront him and say that, you're living from this place of inauthenticity where nobody can get close to you. And so that's so true in our lives. We all have these areas of hurt and woundedness and trauma and pain that we can respond to life and say, you know what, I'm never going to fill in the blank, like a vow, like you're saying. And what can often happen is God will often use the events in our lives to help free us from those masks that are effectively prisons that we live in. We think that there's life to be found. We think that there's a way to flourish, but the author is going to use what feels so counterintuitive to us to free us from those masks so that we become more real. We become more fully alive.
Deceptive about those masks is
Yeah.
they actually did work for us.
Yeah.
Like they maybe were. That's why I love that you used the word survival.
Yeah.
Maybe as a 7-year-old kid, you did need to say, I'm not going to let anybody in.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to be hurt like that. And that was, you had to survive the next 2 or 3 years with that.
Yeah.
So it worked for you.
Yeah.
But now it's not working anymore. And masks can be so deceptive, which again, I want the audience to connect it. We're going from storytelling sometimes to their life.
To real life.
So let me do that with you.
Okay.
What were some of the things that you've come to realize that God has had some masks or some things that he peeled away through your journey?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest is trusting that the author, that God, is a father who deeply cares and who's so involved in the details of my life, but my worth is not built around what I do. It's not built around productivity, that he loves me for me. And I think that the mask that I have had and still have and still can wrestle with at times is that my worth and value comes from my productivity. It comes through what I do. It comes through my success. And boy, in our culture, that sure is something that can be so seductive.
Culture feeds into that.
Well, yeah, it's usually like when you're at a get together or party, it's, hey, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
We can inadvertently sort of measure each other up by our, especially as men, as areas of success or not success. Where God has such a bigger and deeper paradigm. It's not that those things are unimportant, but you are absolutely immeasurably treasured as my son. It doesn't matter what you do. It's ultimately who you are. You think about when Jesus was launched into his public ministry, the first thing that God did was he said, "You are my son in who I am well pleased." Before Jesus did anything, he had no ministry record up until that point. And I think that
he hadn't accomplished the very thing he was sent here to accomplish.
Yeah.
And his father was already saying, I'm just crazy about you.
You're the beloved. Yeah. Before you do anything. And I think it's, for me, it can often be a lifelong battle of, well, I have to do something.
We've talked about this before over coffee.
Yeah.
You're an Enneagram 3, aren't you?
I think so. Yeah. I think I'm a 3.
I think you probably are, since you struggle with it, because, someone may, if they don't know the Enneagram 3 is significance is very important to us.
Yeah.
I'm an Enneagram 3.
Yeah.
If you ain't winning, you're sinning.
Yeah. That's good.
That's the way we feel about life.
Sticker, yeah.
But that's an ongoing battle for an Enneagram 3.
Yeah.
Is to learn that my worth and my value is not based on my accomplishments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why failure rocks our world so often. It rocks anybody's world, but especially an Enneagram 3, and to recognize, especially with God or the people that are close to us in our life that really value us.
Yeah.
Our significance to them isn't based on our success.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. And really the only way we start learning that usually is not from successes.
Through failure and pain and hardship and setback and all the fun stuff of life, right?
I wish it was like you and I could sit here and go like, so where'd you learn that lesson? Well, I won like 5 straight things, and I learned that winning really didn't matter that much. That's not the way it usually is.
Yeah.
It's something tragic happened. Yeah.
More often than not, yeah.
So, okay, this third point of story structure, you talked about unwilling devils as instruments of grace when we met once. You said there's these unwilling devils as instruments of grace. Yeah.
I had a teacher years ago. Her name is Barbara Nicolosi, and she shared this, and it's from a book by Flannery O'Connor, who was she was a novelist, a woman of faith, and she wrote this book that kind of shared her own understanding of storytelling principles. And she said, the most powerful stories that we have been told, that we've experienced, use a principle called using an unwilling devil as an instrument of grace. And it's like, well, what is that? What does that mean? And so I think one neat example of that is at the end of the Return of the King in the Lord of the Rings series, Frodo, who his quest was to take this small, seemingly insignificant ring, this ring of power, and take it into a really dangerous place, into the heart of a volcano, and drop it there, because that was the only way it would be destroyed and save his world, save the lives of those that he knew. So it was a really treacherous, hard, difficult journey. And he gets there, and Frodo was someone who was really kind and decent and courageous. And he gets to the end of the journey, and he can't do it. The ring had the ability to corrupt anybody, And he's been
I'm
slowly
literally picturing this scene in my head right now. I know exactly the scene you're talking about.
Oh, it's so good. It's so visceral.
Yep.
And so Frodo, he gets to the volcano and he can't bring himself to do it. He's becoming more corrupted by this ring. And Tolkien, when he was writing this, he said, as I was writing this moment, the little author A stepped back and the big author A stepped in. And one of the primary antagonists of the story is this character named Gollum, who's been fighting and following after Frodo to try to get the ring himself. And he attacks Frodo. He, in this really kind of gnarly moment, bites Frodo's finger off, and the ring of power drops into the volcano along with Gollum, the villain. It's a traumatic ending. It's something that Frodo has the inability to do. And it takes this unwilling devil, Gollum, this villainous character, to do something horrible that becomes a means of grace because Frodo in of himself can't do it. He has the inability to do it. And my goodness, I think we all have those experiences in life where we think that it's about us striving and pursuing the goal. And sometimes really good things. I want to make an impact or start this nonprofit or help someone, and that's really good. But what stories can teach us is that we don't have the ability in and of ourselves to fully complete it. We need an incredible act of grace and mercy, an ongoing act of grace and mercy in our lives. And that points us to the ultimate story, to God's story, that in those critical moments, it's the big author that steps into our story. It's the big author that carries our shoulders, that carries our burdens. He's the one that comes in those dark nights of the soul, that does the seemingly impossible. He takes the worst thing of our lives, if we let him, and can bring something truly beautiful and redeeming out of it. And that's the ultimate picture of that is on the cross.
Yeah.
In that moment, as Jesus hung on the cross, it was considered in the Roman Empire, and for those that saw him, the most humiliating, grotesque, unbelievable. How could a God-man, die like this? Jesus was most likely naked when he hung on the cross. It would have been conceived as utterly astonishing and humiliating. And
I'll get really graphic here because I studied about crucifixion and everything, because we glorify it a little bit. So we have the crucifixes and you don't want to have it. But I mean, he would have had urine and feces running down his leg and blood and running all over him, and it would have stunk, and it would have been, and that's your whole point is like there was nothing godlike about him hanging on that cross.
The complete opposite of dignifying.
Yeah.
But far worse than that, it was the utter abandonment from God that caused him to say, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And what's really fascinating is Tim Keller had pointed out, he was quoting David from the Psalms. He was literally bleeding scripture. He was quoting that. Why? Because he had the fully formed story of God in his mind and his heart, even as he was dying on the cross. And so God took the worst thing imaginable, and that was the defeat of evil in the world and in our lives. And so if we look at that, we look at what Jesus has done, and we say, gosh, that was, I can't believe that would happen. Then it gives us the ability to look at our lives and go, in those situations where we say, how could anything good come of this? How? Like, yeah, that's great. That happened to a story in a character movie. That's really interesting. But we have the ultimate example of that to look at and point to.
Well, and that's so, again, to connect it to the audience, I guess you could say there's forks in the road that all of us have, right?
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to go there.
Yeah.
But because of this unwilling devil, I ended up going this way.
Yeah.
And I can, after living 51 years on this planet, I can promise if enough time goes by, you'll look back. And it does take time sometimes, but you'll look back and you go like, oh, that was painful. Yeah. I didn't want that. I wanted to go that direction. I wanted to stay in that job. I wanted to have whatever it might be. Yeah. But, thank God. Yeah. That unwilling devil came and took me down this other path.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. We can have these experiences. And I think more often than not, life can feel really random and disconnected, or really just seemingly ordinary. And my wife and I will often joke, it's like, does life just feel like one long to-do list? Like you get up, you gotta get this done and this done, and figure out the 401k and this, that, and the other. Yep. And that's true. Like those are like the details of our lives. But I think what's so powerful about this is as scripture calls us to remember, like there's something bigger and deeper that's always at work. And there's an author who's way more involved and invested in your life than you could hardly imagine and even comprehend. And then it gives us cause to go in those moments where life feels really dark and really hard and really confusing. Will I trust the author? Will he bring about good? Or am I on my own on this?
Mm-hmm. A perfect example was the story that you told earlier, the story of Joseph. And if a listener doesn't know, it's the story is told in like the last part of the book of Genesis, first book in the Bible. But at the end of that, once Joseph is able to look, a lot of years have gone by.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pain in there where he didn't know, and he might have been going, why?
Yeah.
Why is this happening? But eventually he goes, what you meant for harm, God worked for good. Which is, you were the unwilling devils were used to, in fact, if you know the story, save an entire nation of people. So let's go to the last one, conflict. I think it was you who quoted this to me, and I've used it so many times. Conflict is to story what sound is to music. That you can't have music without sound, and there's no good story without a lot of conflict. Which, again, we hate conflict in our life. Why? Because it's uncomfortable.
My wife has shared, she's a really talented musician, and how, music is made with tension, and the parallel for stories is conflict, or you could use the word tension too, is that you can have a minimal amount of settings, minimal amount of characters, but if you don't have meaningful, intentionally designed conflict, you don't have a great story. It is the skeleton of the story. It's the main ingredient, if you will. And I think it's not just conflict from the standpoint of things that are happening to the character or bad things. It's intentionally designed conflict that the author is going to move a character forward in their story. Events are going to take place that oftentimes are disorienting and confusing, and will allow the character to have choices along the way, that they are active agents in the unfolding of their own personal dramas and stories. But the author will bring in characters and situations that continually confront characters, like with their mask, and have them have to deal with their own issues and their own baggage. And the story becomes way more about who that character is becoming, who they're transforming into, than their goal. So Good Will Hunting, the author used intentionally designed conflict. So it's Will the therapist confronting, or I'm sorry, it's Sean the therapist confronting Will when he's sitting on that bench, and he's saying, do you know what it's like to look up at the Sistine Chapel and stare at that? You're a guy that can just quote and know all about Michelangelo, but do you know what that's like? That's an intentionally designed moment for Will, for him to have to really wrestle with himself and his own false way of living life. And that's really true, is that the author is going to use intentionally designed conflict. So the parallel for our lives is, it could be that that coworker that's really frustrating or annoying to you, wondering like, is this just someone to deal with? And that's sort of one lens or one perspective to look at it. Or is this someone who's been orchestrated in my story and me for them? And how might God want to be changing me through this experience? Or just the ordinary hassles of everyday life. We could just look at it like that. Or is the author up to something bigger in our lives? And I think as we continue to kind of press into that perspective, we start to see that there's a lot of really beautiful and interesting and dynamic things that are happening in our lives. As John Piper has said, there's probably a million things that are happening in your life at any given time. All the different strands that the author is weaving together.
That we don't realize.
We probably only see a few, but this helps us to get, I think, a little bit closer to that.
Well, and this is why I love our conversation, and I'll end with this. But it should change our perspective, or the lens that we look through. Because if pain and suffering is just meaningless, accidental things, for so much of humanity, that's what it has been to them. Which is where I think, again, the author that you keep referring to, God, consistently reminds us it's not. It's not that I'm causing this pain. We live in a broken world. So there's some things that happen to us. It's not that God causes that, but he's allowing it, but he's going, but I'm not going to waste it. That if we allow that pain and that suffering, or that annoying coworker, or whatever it might be, and we look deep enough and hard enough, it'll change our perspective to say, this could help my story in becoming who God made me to be. I love that.
The truth of it, that's so good, Pat. The truth of it is, there's we're always telling ourselves a story. We're always making sense of the world through a story. I mean, the word worldview is effectively a story of the world. And so, one of those false stories can be is, I'm really just on my own here to make it work. And life is about getting what you can. Or another story that we're often told is, life is about living the designer life, right? Meaning like I want to, and again, nothing wrong with this, but it's about having the spouse and the several kids and the white picket fence and, building up the 401k. And those are all really good things. But if that's your story, if that's all that reality is for you, that's really the measure of what life is and its significance. But if life is bigger than that, if it's greater than that, if it's more dynamic and compelling than that, then it really opens up things to a dimension that we go, those other stories are not true, but this one that God's inviting to is eternal and energizing and transforming, and even the worst things in my life will somehow be good in the end, even if I can't see it.
God's a great recycler.
Yes, that's good.
He won't waste a hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chad, thank you so much. I told the audience, and I'm sure many of you are agreeing with me, you're never going to watch movies again. You're going to be looking for the inciting incident, and you're going to be looking for the mask that the author is trying to peel back from the character. And you're going to be seeing these reversals you talked about, right? Where there's these continual inciting incidents. You'll be watching how this conflict is growing in the story. And as you get close to the culmination, we're all sitting there going, are they going to survive? Are they going to make it? Are they going to learn? And that's what makes story powerful, but it's our story.
Yeah.
Every one of us has a similar story. And so I would encourage the audience, start paying attention, to look back in your life. What were the inciting incidents? What are the inciting incidents might be happening now?
Yeah.
In the future, when you go through something, pay attention to it and then be asking the question, what might the author of life be wanting to teach me through this?
That's really good.
Well, Chad, thanks so much. How can people get a hold of you? How could people connect with you?
Yeah, I'll have my info here in the show notes. Okay. And I do brand and creative solutions for nonprofits and businesses, and really help them to tell their stories in a variety of different facets.
It's perfect, because we just got this entire podcast was the power of story.
Yeah.
And you're saying what you do is you really help brands understand, what is your story?
Right.
What is it that the world needs to know about who you are and why you do what you do? So that's what you do. So we'll have that in the description below this on all of our audio platforms and YouTube as well, and our social media platforms as well. We'll have that information for them. So 2 truths and a lie.
Okay.
We've known each other for 15 years. There's no way you're going to stump me. Give me 2 truths and a lie. Ironic, because this is no gray areas and I'm asking you to lie to me.
Yeah. So I've taken a kayak down kind of a series of rapids, like class 4 rapids, just by myself. My grandfather was the first person in Arizona to receive penicillin, which was considered an experimental drug. And both of my grandfathers stole John Wayne cigarettes and got in trouble from him for it.
Those are good. Those are really good, because I have no idea. The John Wayne one's got to be true, because it's so far out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that is true.
That is true.
So they both sold. Okay, for the younger viewers, John Wayne, iconic Duke. Western actor. I don't know how. Probably over 100 films he's been in.
Oh, tons.
They both stole the cigarettes?
They were like 18 and at Slide Rock up near Sedona. And they see this truck.
He shot a lot of Westerns up there.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did a lot of Westerns up in that area. And so both my grandfathers, funny enough, were friends with one another, and they saw this truck and there was like cigarettes on the dashboard, and they're like, yeah, these are free. Let's take it. And so they started smoking it and thinking they're lords of creation. And they hear this voice behind him saying, boys, do you know whose cigarettes those are? And they turn up and it's John Wayne, who's like eclipsing the sun. And they're like, we're sorry, Mr. Wayne. And so we always tell that at like family get-togethers.
And he was a big man too. He's like 6'4" or something like that. So he probably was blocking out the sun.
Very intimidating. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to say the rapids. That's the lie.
That is the lie.
I got it.
That is the lie. That's good. That's good. I spent some time doing like whitewater rafting and whatnot, but never on a kayak.
Yeah. Yeah. Kayaks, that's a whole different thing than whitewater rafting. Okay. So what was the first one that you said?
The first one was my grandfather. It was true. My
the penicillin.
Yeah. He was the first person in the state of Arizona he got in a terrible car accident when he was in his early 20s, and he got rushed to the hospital, and they administered penicillin. At the time, it was an experimental drug.
They weren't sure. Man, isn't that crazy to think that was for you and me one generation ago.
It's pretty wild.
Where they were doing something that's so common now.
I know.
But
you
it was
just get a bottle now. And
yeah.
for him, it was like, is this thing even going to be safe?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Chad, thank you so much for sharing with us.
It's been great.
I really do believe that if we allow it, this can be a complete perspective change for us and transformational.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You bet. It's been great. Thanks, Pat.
Wow, what a transformational message Chad DeMiguel leaves with us. To see more incredible guests like Chad in the future, make sure to subscribe to our channel, thumbs up this video, and comment below 1 or 2 of your most powerful, inciting incidences as Chad discussed. Thanks for watching and listening. See you next time.